Well, welcome to the 700 Club. Fatigue, trouble breathing, brain fog, and blackouts. These are just some of the symptoms suffered by 1 out of 3 people who've contracted COVID. They're also 40% more likely to develop diabetes.
Well, this mysterious condition is called long COVID, and the Biden administration is now making an all-out effort to fight it. CBN medical reporter Lori Johnson explains.
While the U.S. is experiencing an uptick in COVID cases, the federal government is turning its attention to people who recovered from COVID but are left with strange, often debilitating symptoms that remain for months, even years.
But once I got COVID, and now on the other side of it, all I have now is my faith, my family, and a few friends.
Marjorie Roberts experienced a loss in quality of life when her long COVID symptoms took hold.
Losing my breath, exhaustion, a level of fatigue that I had never in my life experienced. It was just so many different things.
Shelby Boyd tells a similar story.
Being in bed for about 6 months and having just chronic pain. I had tremors. I had blackouts.
Like millions with long COVID, Marjorie and Shelby hope to recapture the life they enjoyed before COVID.
I rode horses. I was a super busybody. I'd been in the business world for the last 8 years working.
The CDC estimates 1/3 of people who had COVID-19 have lingering symptoms such as shortness of breath, fatigue, and brain fog.
There's so much interest and attention around long COVID now, as there should be, because it's affecting so many of us.
Early research shows similarities between brains affected by long COVID and those of chemotherapy and Alzheimer's patients.
COVID almost certainly affects what we call the blood-brain barrier. And as you may know, normally there's really a tight seal that keeps toxins and various kinds of chemicals we don't want, out of our brain and in our blood. But COVID seems to weaken that.
And it's not just the brain. A new study shows people who've had COVID are 40% more likely to develop diabetes within a year than those not infected.
The science is definitely starting to demonstrate this link between people who previously had COVID and increasing rates of new diabetes diagnoses.
Public health leaders say they're expanding research into long COVID to better understand its causes, potential treatment, and how to support patients suffering from it.
Long COVID is real, and there is still so much we don't know about it.
Diana Barrett founded Survivor Corps, offering support to people with long COVID.
We have over 200,000 members, and sadly, it is just growing and growing and growing. And I should also mention that children are not spared.
So while the medical community has been primarily focused on preventing hospitalization and death, they're now confronting the mysterious condition affecting people who survived acute COVID but are left with something that in many cases is much worse. Gordon?
Well, Lori, why do some people get long COVID and others don't? Is it based on how severe the initial infection is?
That's a great question, and it is one of the most perplexing questions facing scientists right now. And the answer is no. You would think that, but with all we know about COVID up until this point, that the people who get long COVID are people who are generally less healthy. That is absolutely not the case. What we're seeing is many people who are young and healthy getting long COVID, people who even had mild cases of COVID or even asymptomatic cases are getting long COVID. Now, the symptoms and the duration, they vary. And it doesn't really affect people the same way. Some people have sort of mild, long COVID symptoms, but some people's symptoms are so bad that they can't even work. In fact, Gordon, the Brookings Institution estimates that 15% of the unfilled jobs right now are due to people who have long COVID and can't work.
Well, what's the link to diabetes? Diabetes, we know, is one of the risk factors, that if you have diabetes and you get COVID, you're more likely to be hospitalized, you're more likely to die. Now we're hearing that diabetes can actually be triggered by COVID. What's the link?
That's absolutely true. So that's one of the things that scientists are studying. There are people who are suffering all types of problems with long COVID. And so doctors really don't have a standard of care right now. They don't have a cure. But there are these post-COVID care centers, hundreds of them all over the country right now. And the Survivor Corps lists them all. And for that list, you can go to our website, cbnnews.com. There's one here in our area at Centera Norfolk General Hospital. And so one thing that they've noticed is Survivor Corps polled its members and found out that 40% of them, their symptoms went away or dissipated in a large way after they got vaccinated. So that's not a scientific study, but it was dramatic enough to warrant a scientific study right now that Yale is doing. So still so many questions that need to be answered. The diabetes questions and so many others.
So you're saying this is sort of like shingles, that you can have chicken pox in your youth and then later develop shingles, but you can prevent it by getting a shingles vaccine. So there'll be a long COVID vaccine?
Well, they're really not sure what the vaccine link is. So there are people who had long COVID. They had COVID. They were not vaccinated. They got COVID. Then they had long COVID. And then they got vaccinated. And 40% of them, their symptoms dissipated or went away. That's not a scientific study. The symptoms could have gone away for a different reason. So that's why Yale is actually doing this scientific study. So that's one more sort of piece to the puzzle, is what kind of an influence do vaccines have on long COVID?
All right, let's talk about BA2. We've left the Greek alphabet, going back to the normal alphabet, because we've lost track of all the variants. I confess I've really let my defenses down in terms of trying to prevent getting it, on the basis that BA2 is sort of like a bad cold. The new variants aren't as severe, but at the same time, can the BA2 variant lead to long COVID? And collectively, are we walking into a real problem if 1/3 of the people that get BA2 can develop long COVID symptoms? So are we going to see a surge in long COVID because of BA2?
Well, it's difficult to predict, but we know that people who have gotten all the previous variants have gotten long COVID. So BA2 is on the rise. It's 30% more transmissible than Omicron. BA2 is actually a subvariant of Omicron. And so we're seeing an increase in cases. Philadelphia, for example, just reinstated their indoor mask mandate. Health officials expect the case numbers to start going up and possibly peak in July. A lot of people do have some level of immunity, which is encouraging, and hopefully that will protect people against severe disease and death.
Well, Lori, thanks for the insights. Thanks for the report. If you want updates on this, all you have to do is go to cbnnews.com. We want to keep you informed. And if, like me, you've been letting your defenses down, you might want to rethink that in terms of what are the implications of getting long COVID. In other news, the latest numbers are out and inflation continues to rise. John Jessup has more on that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. John?
That's right, Gordon. Today's Consumer Price Index shows inflation reaching its highest level, continuing its months-long stubborn streak of rising prices. Inflation soaring 8.5% over the last year, the biggest year-over-year increase since 1981, and prices rose 1.2% from February to March. The White House blaming the jump on the war in Ukraine and its impact on gas and oil prices. Economists have been expecting the Federal Reserve to raise interest rates more than previously expected, with many concerned that the rising rates could slow down the economy and lead to a recession. Well, to the latest in the war in Ukraine, after meeting face-to-face with Vladimir Putin Monday, Austria's chancellor described their time together as unfriendly and tough. Meanwhile, the United States is working to confirm unverified reports of a Russian chemical attack on the besieged city of Mariupol. CBN's Jenna Browder has more.
If the use of chemical weapons is confirmed in Ukraine, it could mark a major escalation and turning point in this war. The Pentagon says it's closely monitoring the unconfirmed reports. On social media, a paramilitary battalion incorporated into Ukraine's National Guard is accusing the Kremlin of using a drone to drop a poisonous substance in the city of Mariupol. This is a spokesman for Moscow-backed forces in the disputed region of Donetsk call on Russia to use chemical forces in the city. Ukraine's President Zelensky says the statement testifies to Russia's planning of a new stage of terror against his country. NATO's Secretary General has said this kind of attack would totally change the conflict.
And it will be a blatant violation of international law and will have far-reaching consequences.
Meanwhile, Mariupol's mayor says as many as 20,000 people have been killed in the besieged city. On the diplomatic front, Austria's chancellor is now the first EU leader to meet with Vladimir Putin face-to-face since the invasion began. The chancellor calling the meeting unfriendly and tough after raising the issue of Russian atrocities. And President Biden met virtually with India's prime minister to discuss limiting Russian oil imports and pressuring Putin to end the fighting. And this week, multiple members of Congress will be in Eastern Europe. House leaders Steny Hoyer and Kevin McCarthy are leading bipartisan groups to meet with Ukrainian refugees in a show of solidarity with NATO and Europe. In Washington, Jenna Browder, CBN News.
Thank you, Jenna. Well, more than 6 weeks into the war, Ukrainian refugees continue to cross the border into Poland. CBN's Operation Blessing is there to greet them with food and a place to rest and recover before continuing on their journey.
Hello and welcome to the Operation Blessing relief tent here at Medica border, just very close to the Ukraine here, where people are crossing from Ukraine into Poland to get to safety. And we've been here for several weeks now, and it's still very busy at times. And it comes in waves, and today is again very busy, and we are having many more people coming through this corridor to find their way to the buses. And while they're making their way, people can come into our tent here, which is a wonderful place for them to recover and to rest and to charge their mobile phones, and also to receive hot drinks and hot food, which we're preparing there in our food truck, and also to receive those hygiene kits. And these include like shampoo, hand sanitizer, baby shampoo and toothbrushes and other things that will help them as they're finding a place for the night. And we'd like to thank you so much as CBN Operation Blessing partners for your help to make this all possible. Without you, we couldn't do what we're doing. So we're so thankful. On behalf of all the people who are helping, a huge thank you and God bless you.
Operation Blessing offering a glimmer of hope in challenging times, Gordon.
If you've been a part of the Operation Blessing Disaster Relief Fund, thank you. Thank you for your gifts, for your care and concern for those refugees. We're there in your name when you give to that fund. If you haven't given, I invite you to do it. All you have to do is call us, 1-800-700-7000. Say, I want to give to the Operation Blessing Disaster Relief Fund. You can write to us at CBN Center, Virginia Beach, Virginia, 23463. You can text OB Crisis to 71777, or you can go to cbn.com. There's a place online where you can designate your gift to the Disaster Relief Fund. Either way, do it now. Be part of helping those people in need, and we're going to be there for the long term. This is going to be months, if not years, of recovery. We need your help to do that. Call us, 1-800-700-7000.